Okay, g'day everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for Property Investing for Beginners. My name is Daimien Patterson and I'm presenting this on behalf of Integrity Property Education. Got quite a few people online at the moment. You'll see on your right hand side of your screen there should be a facility there for you to ask questions. Can we just do a test and if you're online now, just type in a test or hello for me, please, in your question box so I can see it. Okay, great. Looks like that's working. Wonderful. Okay, so let's just get into it. Throughout the session, I won't take any questions until the end, but there will be an opportunity to do that at the end. So please, if you have any questions as we go, I will probably write them down. I will probably answer them before we're finished. So make sure you write them down. And if I don't answer them by the time we're finished, you'll have an opportunity to do that at the end. Okay, let's get into it. All right, first of all, a quick pop quiz. Do you know the answers to these questions? You don't have to answer them now, but it's merely an opportunity to just be honest with yourself about your knowledge. Now, if you're already investing in property, you probably know a lot of this, but there's probably a lot of things you don't know too. And we know a lot about property investment success in Australia and the different results. We know, for example, that if you go back 20 years, only 6% of the population were investing in property. We know now that if you have a look, you'll find that 18% of taxpayers are investing in property. But of that 18% of taxpayers who invest in property, only 93% of them do not get passed through property. So only 7% are actually what I would deem as successful, able to grow a portfolio larger than that. So it's very important that you know the basics and that you know how to grow a portfolio from there. Okay, so the pop quiz. Do you know what LVR stands for? Do you know what equity is? What is the rental yield on a property and how is it calculated? How much of your money does it cost to acquire a property and how much are the banks? How much of your money will it cost you to hold a property? And what key factors make property prices go up? Okay, so first of all, why should we invest in property? Well, first of all, it's arguably low and manageable risk. Of all the forms of investment, property, especially residential property, if you're investing in the middle of the market, is one of the most stable forms of investing you can possibly get into. If you don't believe that, well, you just have to look at the results of the Australian property market over the years. Even in the GFC, whilst the high end of our market did take a hit, the middle of the market held very firm, only taking a modest correction of maybe 5 or 10% and then bouncing back pretty much as soon as the GFC had blown over. So if you're looking for a way to invest that's low risk, whilst no form of investment is completely risk-free, you don't get any lower risk than residential property, in my view. It's an appreciating asset. Now, property won't go up in value all of the time. There will be times when it goes flat, even times when it comes back slightly. But long term, it is a solid growth asset and has been proven year after year after year to grow. Tax benefits. We're going to talk about that tonight. Some of you are going to be pretty blown away by the tax benefits that you get from investment properties. Most people know that they should go get an investment property to save on tax, but very few actually understand how that works. So we're going to go through that tonight. High leverage potential. You can borrow up to 95%. Now, this is a key point of difference that the people who say that you should buy shares routinely forget to mention. With property, you can buy a much greater asset than the amount of money you've got to invest. For example, with, say, $60,000 of your own money, you could then borrow enough to buy, if you know what you're doing, you can find will pay for itself. And then, what's going to make you more money? 60 grand invested in cash or directly into shares, or $500,000 sitting on the market. Okay, and then you can safely expect that a property will appreciate faster than inflation over time because of the supply and demand equation in its most simple form. We live on an island, and as our population grows, the amount of land will stay the same. but the demand for that land to live on will increase. So what you get there is a consistently demand is higher than supply situation. Okay, so what's one example? Well, this is an example of what I've done personally in the past, and it's quite possible for anyone if you know what you're doing. Okay, a little while ago, I was still full-time employed. I was actually in the Army at that time. I did 14 years in the Army, and I was investing on the side. Now, when I started investing, I made all the rookie mistakes that I'm going to try and help you to avoid today. But when this happened is when I started to see some real success. So I bought two properties. The first property was $470,000, and I put a 10% deposit down. It cost me 23 grand in costs. So it cost me about 70 grand of my own money to buy that property. And then the second property was a $620,000 property, and it cost me about 61 of my own money to buy. In turn, it cost me 131 grand of my own money. Now, when I bought these properties, I bought them in an area that I knew was booming. I knew was going to boom. I'd done my research. I knew there were jobs being created. There was a shortage of land, and house prices had to go up. And I think that's the first thing that most investors miss. You must understand that owning an investment property is completely different to owning your own home. The criteria for buying your own home is completely different from the criteria for buying an investment property. But most would-be property investors make that mistake, and they say silly things like, well, if I wouldn't live in it, it wouldn't be a good investment property. You must understand that's absolute rubbish. Okay, the factors that push prices up have nothing to do with the factors about where you need to live. You need to live near your family, you need to live near your work, you need to live near your hobbies. But when it comes to property investing, it's not those things that are going to push the prices up. So I bought these properties. Now, within 1 year, this is what happened. The first property had gone up 130 grand, and the second property had gone up the same amount. Now, that's what a little bit of research can do. Money in, money out, 338k. That's a 258% return on my own money in 12 months. Now, you show me something else that can do that, and I'll be a convert. But property has this amazing result because of the ability to borrow money to get into a higher, a bigger size asset and then hold that asset in the market. All right, so the first thing you need to do is evaluate your mindset. Now, what I say to everybody is that chances are you were taught wrong about money. 9 out of 10 of us are born into families of low to middle income, and we're in who are trapped in what you call the rat race. You know, and the rat race is the working for money rat race. Now, when you think about it, when you left school, you were probably told to get a job, and because you were taught that the way to get money is to work for it. But actually, that's false. The easiest way to get money is to invest. But you need to have a little bit of money up front, and that's why most of us can't avoid going to work. You also need to have a job if you want the banks to lend you money. But the real money, the real wealth creation will be made from buying assets that then make money for you, not working yourself into the ground for your whole life. So it all starts with your mindset. And when I started investing in property and started my educational journey to learn about it, a lot of people said to me, Daimien, you must understand it's 90% in your head and 10% action. Now, at that time, I remember thinking, what a load of rubbish, just hurry up and get to the bit where you show me how to make my money. But now that I've coached thousands of people in property investment, I know that to be an absolute truth. It is 90% in your head. I see a lot of people sabotage themselves all the time. So it starts with being honest with yourself about the way you think about things, and also being honest with yourself about your current financial situation. Amongst your peer group, are you the person who's being the most successful financially, or are you struggling? Are there people you went to school with who perhaps you didn't think were as smart as you, but yet they've got more money than you now? Why is that so? And I can tell you what it's not luck. And a lot of people will get lazy and say, oh, they just got lucky. That's not true. Okay, often it's just a difference in knowledge and then taking action on that knowledge. So there's these things called limiting beliefs and obstacles, and we have to be really honest with ourselves about our attitudes to those things. The strategies your parents suggest to you probably won't succeed today. I think one thing that a lot of people fail to realise is that the way that funding our own retirement works in this country has dramatically changed. Most of our parents grew up in an Australia where all you had to do was pay taxes all your life, and then when you retired, you'd be given the old age pension. That's no longer the case. In the late 80s and early 90s, they brought in superannuation and said everyone must seek to fund their own retirement. At that time, they stopped putting up the old age pension. So whilst it might have been fine to just buy a house and pay it off and then retire on the pension, you can't do that anymore. You must do more than that. You must tend to your own retirement, otherwise you're going to retire broke. You should also be very careful about who you listen to. Only listen to people if you want to achieve the same success they've achieved. Okay, so a lot of us really trust our parents and get our financial education from our parents, and that's fine. If your parents are filthy rich, then keep listening to what they say. But if they're not, then you need to be a bit honest about that. Obviously, don't offend them, but you need to seek your education elsewhere. And watch out for those Mondays experts. When I started Integrity, my company, my very first client, I put him into a property, and 12 months later it was worth 150 grand more than he bought it for, and we were able to then go and get another 2 properties off the back of that, and a 4th property with his super. So in the space of 2 years, he went from having 0 property to having 4. But he said to me, though, after the first 12 months, he said he almost didn't buy that property. And the reason he said was that he went to work the next day, and his mate said to him that, he told his mate that he was buying a property. His mate said, "Where is it?" And he told him the location. And his mate said to him, "I've never heard of it. If I've never heard of it, it can't be a good place to invest." And it really rattled him, because this was a guy who'd been his friend for a very long time. And this friend, he had trusted in all sorts of things. This friend knew deep, dark secrets about him. And when he said it, it really rattled him. And of course, he did go on and buy that property. And I asked him, I said, "Well, what did you do?" And he said, "Well, I thought about it, but then I realised that my mate, whilst I really respected him and liked him and we entrusted him, he didn't know anything about property investment, so I went with your suggestion instead." And that's what we ended up doing. So you've got to be very, very careful about that sort of thing, and be careful who you talk to about property investment. I'm not saying to ignore your parents or ignore anyone else. I think the main thing is just to critically analyse what they're saying, and have a look at whether they've got runs on the board or not themselves. Okay, so why do we invest in property? Now, there's a whole heap of sayings that poor people say to other poor people so they don't feel bad about being poor, and you've got to be very careful of those. One of those is that money is the root of all evil. And a lot of people will use that as a cop-out to say, "Oh, look, I don't want money because I don't want to be evil." Let me tell you something about money. Money doesn't make you evil. What money does is it amplifies who you are. So if you're already a jerk, money's going to make you a bigger jerk. But if you're a good person, having access to money is going to make you a great person, because you'll do wonderful things with that wealth. Now, tell me though, if money's the root of all evil, tell me if these things are evil. Is educating your children evil, or even your children's children, maybe leaving some sort of legacy behind, an educational trust fund for all your descendants? Is getting the best healthcare evil? Anyone who's been very sick will know that healthcare in Australia is not free. And if you've ever lost anyone in the family who's died of a slow death, you'd know what palliative care is. In Australia, most palliative care is where you go to die if you've got some sort of degenerative sickness that's going to take you out slowly. Now, in Australia, it's 4 to a room in most states for that until your very last moments when they're sure you're about to pass, and then maybe, if you're lucky, you'll get your own room. So, you need to be able to fund that. Is travelling evil? Is supporting charities evil? Is having a few recreational toys evil? And is spending more time with your loved ones evil? Well, if you want to spend more time with your loved ones, you're going to have to spend either less time sleeping or less time at work. Now, most people aren't happy to negotiate with losing sleep, but they're quite happy to give up some time working. But the problem with that is most of us get stuck in this rat race of having to work for money, and we need money, so therefore we work. But if you want to escape that and you want to spend more time with your loved ones and spend more time pursuing your hobbies and doing all these things, well, there's one thing you need to do all these things, one thing that all these things have in common, and that is money. You need money to do all these things, and there's no point in lying to yourself about it. You need more money than you need, and what does that mean? Well, you need money to pay for your food, water, accommodation, electricity, car, and petrol to get to and from work. You need money to pay for all your hobbies, those things that make you happy. Maybe it's guitar lessons, maybe it's fishing, maybe it's travel, whatever. You need money to fund your retirement, and depending on how long you plan on living for, that could be a very long time. But finally, you need money for those things that you don't plan on, like that illness that you thought you were never going to get, like that drunk driver who crashed into your car despite the fact that you're the very best driver you know, for when you lose your job. All of those things, you need money for the unexpected. So you need more money than you think you need. And you can stick your head in the sand and deny it, but as long as you do that, you're not going to take the action you need to get yourself in a position where you're comfortable. Okay, I think the first thing that most people fail to understand is that there is a difference between good and bad debt. Now, most families will teach you that all debt is bad, and that's not true. Okay, some debt is bad, but some debt is good. Some debt is actually critical to accumulating wealth if you're going to get ahead from a middle income, low income type perspective. So the definition of good and bad debt is this. Good debt is debt that's used to buy assets that make you money, assets that either go up in value, bring in an income, or do both. Bad debt is debt that's used to buy assets that go down in value, like cars, jet skis, holidays, all those sorts of things. So it's perfectly okay to have good debt, but it's not okay to have bad debt. So if you've got car loans, holiday loans, all those sorts of things, then you need to eliminate them as soon as possible. But if you've got debt against properties and things like that, then that is not a bad thing, because those properties generally will service that debt for you, and that debt will allow you to hold a greater asset in the market. And you'll see later on how that happens. Okay. All right, what's a loan to value ratio? When you're borrowing money, you need to understand how these things work. The banks have all sorts of rules, and they anchor them against certain loan to value ratios. So what is an LVR? Well, let's say we've got this property here with a $450,000 loan, and its value is $500,000. Well, a loan to value ratio is what percentage of the property's value is the loan. So in this case, 450 is to 500, which equals 90%. And that's how they work out an LVR. Now, some banks will put limits on how much they can lend you versus the value of the property. And the reason why they do that is because they like to keep what they call some security in the property, i.e., if you don't pay the loan, they can foreclose, sell the property for $500,000 in this case, and get enough money to pay out the loan, but also the administrative costs, the agent's commissions, and the like. Rental yield. What is rental yield? Well, rental yield is the percentage of a property's value that we get back in rent every year. So by way of example, if this property is worth $500,000 and it rents for $500 a week, well then it rents for $28,600 a year. Sorry, $550 a week is $28,600 a year. So what percentage of $500,000 is $28,600? And it's very simple. We just divide the rent by the value and then times it by 100 to convert it to a percentage. So in this case, that particular property would be getting a yield of 5.72%. Now, why would we want to know that? Well, if we're going to borrow pretty much all of the money to buy a property, then we know at the moment, for example, the interest rate's at 5%. So if the yield is greater than the interest rate, then we can have some confidence that the property is going to pay its own bills. If you had a yield that was 4%, for example, you would know that you would have to chip in some money to do that. Equity. What is equity? Okay, so equity is the difference in a property's value to its loan. Difference in a property's value to its loan. So in this case, we've got a $500,000 property with a loan of $275,000. The total equity in this case then is the value minus the loan, which is $225,000. But also we have what we call available equity. Now, as I mentioned earlier, banks will only lend up to a certain percentage of the value of a property. So whilst the total equity on that property might be 225 grand, the available equity is much less. So what we need to do is work out what the LVR limit is, in this case 90%, subtract the loan amount from that, and that leaves us with 175k. So in this case, this property, we could borrow another $175,000 against this property if we wanted to, and we could use that for a number of things. We could use that to cover the deposits on a few more investment properties. We could use that to buy the new, sports car we wanted. We could use that to pay a around the world holiday. Of course, we need to be very careful about doing that and making sure that the rent that property is receiving will cover the extra expense of having the loan, the extra payments. And as the years go by, the rents will go up, and you'll be able to do that. And that's how the wealthy pull money out of properties without having to sell them. In fact, not that long ago, at one of our live training days, we had somebody come along, and he said to me, geez, I wish I met you 6 months ago. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, I just went on a round the world holiday and for 6 months. And before I left, I sold my investment property to raise the money to pay for the holiday. And he said to me, I didn't know that I could just refinance it and pull the money out. So it's very important to understand how that works, so you never sell. Because when you sell an investment property, you kill the goose that lays the golden eggs, and you might get a big feed on that day, but you'll never get any more eggs out of that property. It will never make you any more money. Also, too, when you sell, you get taxed. And so a knowledge of how finance works is very, very important to make sure that you can work your portfolio to the greatest advantage. All right, acquisition costs. So when we have an investment property, we talk about two costs. We talk about the acquisition cost and the holding cost. The acquisition cost is how much of your money is it going to cost you to buy the property. So we're not talking about the overall price. We're talking about how much of your money do you have to throw in to acquire the property. And then the holding cost is how much of your money do you have to put in, if any, week to week to then hold that property thereafter. So here's an example. Here on the left, we've got a classic looking investment property, modern investment property, price point $422,500, renting for $425 a week. So what's the acquisition cost? Well, straight away we're going to need a 10% deposit. Then we're going to need to pay stamp duty. So there's a sample amount of what stamp duty would be on there. Loan fees. Every loan, there'll usually be an establishment fee, so we put that in there, about $550. Building inspector's fee. Now, when you're an investor, you should be doing 2 inspections buying a property. The first inspection should be a full, thorough inspection by your building inspector, where they will create a report, and then the second, if there's anything wrong with the property, you then provide that to the vendor and say to them, hey, I want you to fix that before I buy it. And then you send the same building inspector back for a second inspection. That'll cost you about $550, maybe $650 these days. All right, quantity surveyor. We're going to talk about depreciation later. 75% of property investors do not claim depreciation according to the ATO, and that's absolute madness, and you'll see why later. But to get a depreciation, we're going to talk about depreciation in a second, but to get the schedule done is $590 in most cases. A solicitor, you should always budget up to $2,000, and always be wary of the chop shop type conveyancing firms that do mass production and try and do it cheaply. It's really not the sort of thing you want to necessarily cut costs on. You want to make sure that you've got a proper solicitor who can protect you from anything that could go wrong. And then a letting fee. Now, a letting fee, when you hire a rental manager to manage your property for you, the rental manager will charge you the first week's rent in order to find you a tenant. So we always consider that as part of our acquisition cost. So the total investment to buy this investment property would be $59,577. So that's how much money of your money you'd have to stump up. Now, if you're buying your first property, you'd need to save that amount of money or borrow that money from family. If you're buying subsequent properties, however, you might just do an equity loan from the first investment property for $60,000 and then use the money from that equity loan to cover the costs of the next property. We'll talk more about that later. Okay, so how would you be approved for a loan? Now, if you're a first-time buyer, the banks, and there are some banks that will lend you up to 95% for an investment property. Now, they could lend that to you if you have no defaults on your credit file. if you do have defaults on your credit file, then get in touch with us, because there are a few agencies now that are helping people to clean up their credit file. And depending on how bad it is will depend on how much it costs you. But can I say it's worth doing? If you're in a position to invest, but no one will lend you the money because of a black mark on your credit file, then make sure that you do get in touch with us, because there are as I said, few people can help you do that now, and it'll be money very well spent, and we can refer you on to those people. If you have no or low credit card debt and personal loans, if you've been in your current job for a while and are not on probation, and if you have genuine savings, they'll probably lend you some money. All right, so the next thing we're going to go on to after this slide is the holding costs on a property. But before we do that, we need to understand how properties save you on tax. Now, a lot of people don't understand this, and it's quite important that you learn it now. On the left-hand side of the slide, you can see there's the current tax brackets. Now, a lot of people don't understand how the tax system works in Australia. The key thing to understand about it, firstly, is it's a marginal tax system. And what that means is that the richest person in Australia and the poorest person in Australia don't pay any tax on the first $18,200. And then every dollar they earn after that, up until 37 grand, they pay 19% of that. And then from 37 to 80, they pay 32, and so on. And you can see at the moment there's a 2% debt levy. You also have a 2% Medicare, but we just leave that out to keep it simple at the moment. All right, so let's say that we're on 100 grand a year and we own this investment property in the top right. Now that property's worth 500,000 and it rents for 500 a week. Now the first thing you must understand about having an investment property is that the rent you receive from a property is actually taxable income. So if you don't have any deductions at this point in time, you're going to have a tax bill, not a tax return. So that takes our gross taxable income up to 126. Now we need the deductions to wipe that out. So the first deduction we're going to claim will be the loan interest. And in all property investing, loan interest is always the number one expense that's associated with holding a property. And then soon after that, body corporate and things like that. So in this case, it's a house with no body corporate fees. And can I say, we'll talk a bit about that later, but stay away from units and townhouses as investments, because generally their cash flow is pretty poor, and you can only own so many properties that you have to top up. If you have to throw in $200 a week of your own money, then most people will run out at one or two properties. Now, those properties might be in blue chip locations with strong chances of capital growth, but you'll only ever own two of them. Who's going to make more money? The person who's got 10 properties that are all paying for themselves, but maybe not as blue chip locations, or the person who's only got 2 blue chip locations. 10 properties paying for himself in average areas is going to make you far more money than only 2 properties in blue chip areas. But I digress. Back on task. So we're up 26 grand with our rent, but then our cash deductions have reduced our income by $27,950 in this case. Now what's really interesting about this at the moment is that we haven't talked about depreciation yet. And 75% of property investors are not claiming depreciation. And we know this because every year the ATO does a summary of tax returns, and in that summary they report the statistics about the different tax returns. And they tell us that 75% every year don't claim it. Now, it's quite alarming. A lot of people, I think, just don't claim it because they have no idea what depreciation is. But if we didn't claim depreciation, where would we be at this point in time? Well, we're 26 grand up for rent, and we're, say, 28 grand down. So really, we've only got 2 grand to claim on tax, which at 37% is not going to be a lot of money. It's going to be, about $74,000, which is, $7,400. It'd be nice if it was $74,000. So $740. That's it. That's all we're going to get back. Now, let's add the depreciation. Now, a brand new 4-bedroom home at the moment, you'll be able to depreciate that in its first year at about 15 grand if you use the diminishing value method. Now, admittedly, that does taper off over the years, but if you're building a portfolio, you should always be adding new properties to your portfolio to get that extra depreciation. And the assumption is that the rents will be rising at the same time as the depreciation is tapering off, so it should compensate for that. But if you're getting that 15 grand in your first year depreciation, it's an on-paper deduction. unlike cash deductions where money actually has to leave your bank account for you to then claim 37 or 32.5% back, with depreciation, it's just an on-paper deduction. Now, what is depreciation? Well, in theory, the building you're sitting in right now, the land is not going down in value, but the building itself is. The blinds are going down in value, the carpet's going down in value, all those things that relate to the structure are going down in value. And the ATO allows us to write off the building and all of its fixtures over time. So that's what depreciation is, and that's why we get to claim. But is that piece of real estate really going down in value in such a way? Well, no, it's not, of course. But yet we can make an on-paper deduction. Now let's see what effect that has. What it has is no money leaves our bank account, but on paper we look like we've made a massive loss. We look like we've lost 17 grand now instead of 2 grand. So our taxable income is now assessed to be $83,000, not the $100,000 that our employer was paying tax against. So now we're entitled to a refund. If we take away the difference, the $16,950 or 17 grand, then we should get a tax return of about $6,270, which is 5.5 grand more than we were going to get without that depreciation. Now, this is really, really important point for investors to realise. 5.5 grand a year in your tax is the equivalent to over $100 a week. Now, if you look at that investment property there, it's renting for $500 a week. There's $100 a week extra money or 20% increase that you're missing if you don't know what depreciation is and you're not buying the right stuff. You could have two houses that are side by side, one that's brand new and dripping wet with depreciation claims, and one that's old, and they might be the same price, but the brand new one is going to cost you less to hold. And that's really, really important if you want to make sure all your properties are paying for themselves. All right, so then how do we calculate the rest of the holding costs? Well, let's look at this property again on the left. Interest on the loan at 92% loan. Let's say a 90% loan plus the mortgage insurance added on, which is usually about 2%. Rental management fees, rates, insurance, maintenance. They're our total cash expenses of $25,866. But then we've got our depreciation, and our total deductions is about 40 grand. So then we have the rent received and our tax return. So where does that property, let me go back, where does that property leave us? So in real terms, we've only had cash expenses of $25,866. But in terms of money actually received, we've received 22 grand in the rent and we've received 7 grand in our tax return. So we're getting 26 grand going out the door and 29 grand coming in. So you can see what a massive difference that depreciation is. And that property there is actually what we call a negative cash flow, i.e. before tax we get less rent than we've got cash expenses, but then after tax we end up in front. So we're negative cash flow before tax and then positively geared after tax. Okay, so what makes a good property? Well, first and foremost, you must understand that it's the location that makes your money, not the house itself. And there is no such thing as the Australian property market. Every market is different. And a property market, from an investing perspective, is defined as one commutable distance from the employment centre. So, for example, Sydney is a property market, but Newcastle and Wollongong are very different markets. Same in Brisbane, Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, same in Perth, and go down south down to the wine region, totally different property markets, all based around the job, wherever the jobs are, the job employment centre, because people with jobs buy houses. So if jobs are being created in that area, then you can see that the property market will boom. If jobs are being lost, you'll see the property market will go backwards. And we can see that now happening in certain parts of South Australia and Victoria, where all those car factories are closing down. Those property markets in vicinity of those car factories are in real strife. So I think mistake number one that new property investors make is they try and buy their property locally. Now, you should only buy your investment property locally if you happen to live in the number one place to invest in Australia right now. If you don't buy your property there, because you're going to lose out on the opportunity to make a lot of money. And got to remember why you're investing in property. You are investing in property to make money. Say it loud and proud, and don't be ashamed. unfortunately in Australia, we get taught not to talk about money, but if you want to be good at making money, you need to talk about it. And your goal is not to just have lots of money and get off on that. The goal is to have lots of money and then do good things with it, not hoard it and just, look at your own bank statement. All right, so what factors are going to make a good area to invest before we then go and find a property in that location? Well, we want to look at supply and demand. Supply and demand is the basic economic principles of all price setting. So I'll give you an example. When Cyclone Larry wiped out all the bananas in Queensland, what happened to banana prices? Well, banana prices went up. Why did they go up? Did they go up because more people wanted to eat bananas? No. The demand was the same, but the supply was halved, and that in turn pushed the prices up. So you can have a boom from one of two things, either an increase in demand or a reduction in supply. In property investment terms, a reduction in supply might be some sort of constraint to land and ability to build houses. For example, the Christchurch earthquake, most people would think that property prices in Christchurch would have been affected badly by the earthquake, but actually it was quite the reverse. Of course, those houses that were destroyed and on the fault line were then deemed worthless, but the rest of the houses that survived then started to shoot up in value because half the population was homeless and they needed to live in the other half of the housing. So a lot of people, would assume that the market went backwards when in fact it went up. But on the other side of things, so on the demand side, you can predict, if you do your research, you can predict what areas are going to boom based on increase in demand. How? We'll go to the areas where there's job creation, where there's strong immigration or interstate migration, and where there's infrastructure being built to make an area more attractive so more people will want to live there. Okay, so job creation, international migration and interstate migration, and infrastructure development that makes an area more attractive, be it extra public transport, shopping centres, all those sorts of things. Once you've identified the area that you want to invest in, then you've got to go looking for a particular property in that location. And let me save you a whole lot of grief. Buy a brand new residential middle of the market property. Why? Well, first of all, buying brand new, not only do you get all that depreciation, which I think if there was no other reason to buy new than depreciation, you would still buy new, but you also get a whole heap of other benefits when you buy a new property. You get a warranty on the property. So for the first 6 or 12 months, depending on how long the warranty is, anything wrong with that property, the builder's got to fix it for you. You also, in most states, get a structural guarantee. And that structural guarantee is very, very important. When you think about it, if you're buying a second-hand property, you never really know for sure. Yes, you get a building inspection done, but if you've ever read a building inspector's report on a second-hand property, the legal disclaimer is about 4 pages long because they don't have an X-ray machine and they can't see behind the walls and they can't see the slab and they can't see the plumbing that's covered in concrete and all those sorts of things. Now, whilst it's unlikely that you're going to buy a property that's not structurally sound, they are out there, and if you bought one, it'd be an absolute disaster, especially if you borrowed $400,000 to buy it, and then you found out later that the house had to be condemned and it was only worth the $200,000 land value. Well, then you're in a real strife. So I don't know why people would do anything other than buy a brand new property, but take it from me, from a risk management perspective, very, very important way to do it. Also, if you're never going to sell, well, then you want to have that property forever. So if you want to have that property forever, you need it to have some longevity. If you buy it brand new, the building code in Australia is 25 years. So the property is going to last at least 25 years before you start having any issues of concern. And also, too, one of the key things about holding a property is the maintenance costs. A lot of people will go and buy the old properties in the cheaper areas to try and chase the rental yield, but still have the cash flow of that property wiped out by high maintenance costs, tenant problems, and all those sorts of things. Okay, why residential? Well, why and not commercial? Well, commercial property is actually really great when you've got a tenant. The tenant usually pays a very high yield, and they also pay all your rates and things for you. But there's a few disadvantages to commercial property which make it not very good, especially for beginners. The first disadvantage is that the most you can borrow at the moment is about 60%, and so that means you've got to stump up 40% of your own money if you want to buy a commercial property. Now, why would you do that when you could go and buy 4 residential properties of the same value in 4 different areas and increase with 10% deposits and increase your chances of having some success and reducing all your risk at the same time. The second point about commercial property is that while they may be great when you've got a tenant, it's a long time between tenants, because how many people today were out there looking for 4-bedroom homes versus how many people today were out there looking, to buy a butcher shop, or out there looking to buy some sort of office space or rent some sort of office space. So commercial property is not really the most attractive, just for those sound logical reasons. And then why the middle of the market? Well, high end of the market in residential can be quite volatile. That's where you get a lot of what I call trophy properties. And, why would you buy them anyway? When times are good, the prices boom, but when times are bad, they drop quite dramatically. And I've previously had a client who owned a $2.5 million canal front home, and then when the GFC hit, their property dropped to $1 million. So they lost in 6 months $1.5 million of value. But at that same time, the middle of the market, when the GFC hit, only dropped about 5%. And because that's where all the nurses, doctors, firemen, police officers, school teachers, that's where all those, and government employees, that's where they all live, all the middle income earners on solid jobs. So when they tend to weather those storms and the market stays a lot more solid. Also then, why stay away from the low end of the market? Well, the low end of the market, often you've got a lot of older homes that have great levels of maintenance. You also find your bad tenants there. Now, I'm not saying, and I say this very, very carefully, people who live in, poor people aren't bad people. Of course they're not. Money doesn't decide whether you're good or bad. But bad people are almost always poor people, because they have a really bad attitude and they treat others poorly. And as a result, that affects their employment and how much money they get paid, and therefore they live in the lower end of the market. So stay away from the lower end of the market. You'll stay away from pest infestation, structural problems, high maintenance costs, bad tenants, all those sorts of things. I remember I met a guy a few years ago now. I think he was 27 at the time, and he said to me, "Oh yeah, mate, I've got 10 properties." Now you can always spot someone when they tell you how many properties they got within the first 2 seconds, and also they articulate their properties in terms of the number of properties, not the value of those properties. But he started talking to me, and he said, "Oh yeah, I've got a shed here, I've got a shack there," and not one of his properties was worth more than 150 grand. His total portfolio of 10 properties was 1.25 million. Now, you tell me what's better, 10 small properties like that with all the problems that go with them, or 3 solid properties that are in the middle of the market and low risk. Anyway, I said to this guy, I said, "So I bet you then you've got some tenant problems." He looked at me like I was a clairvoyant and said, "How did you know?" And he actually, it's quite funny, he actually asked me, he said, "Have you been speaking to my family?" I said, "No, mate, if you've got 10 properties all at that price point, I guarantee you've got a bad tenant." And evidently, he had too. All right. Okay, so how do we accumulate a portfolio? Well, the first thing we need to do is get the money together to buy our first property. Now, I think if you're going to buy middle of the market, you're looking at minimum 400 now for a brand new property. So that's your price point. So you're going to need 40 grand deposit, and then about 10 grand on top. Best case, you might be able to get a 95% loan and then only put 5% in, but you will get slugged a bit more mortgage insurance. So you need to have about 50 grand at the minimum. I think comfortably $60,000. How do you get that money? Well, if you've got some family that are willing to support you, don't go to them and ask them for a handout. I mean, if you can get one, that's nice. But maybe you could go to your parents and say, "Hey, Mum, Dad, we want to buy our first property. Can you please support us?" One idea that's been suggested to us is that we get an equity loan using your property as security, or you as the guarantor for that small loan, and then that loan, we use the money from that loan to pay the deposit and cost. But if nobody loves you, and they're not going to lend you, or if they do love you, they don't, and they're not in a position to do it, then really you've probably got no choice. You just have to stump up the money. And the thing is this: I'm quite serious about this. Knowing what property can do and how easy it can make you money, if I had to do it all again, that's exactly what I would do. I would rent a room, live with my parents, live in a caravan park, keep my costs down as much as possible. I'd have a full-time day job, part-time night job. I'd stop blowing money on things to impress people I don't even like. I wouldn't buy any new clothes. Just for 1 year, I would save that money up, just for 1 year. And I'd just live like a pauper, cheese sandwiches, 2-minute noodles, whatever, ride my bike to work, save on petrol, do whatever I could do, just for 1 year. And 1 year's not that long. Think about it. How long ago was this time last year? it's not that long at all. But if that 1 year gets you into the property market, once you've got that first property, you don't need to do that again, because that property will go up in value and you'll be able to buy more property off the back of it. So let's say we finally get to that first property, 400 grand. Let's buy it for that, a 90% loan. Then all we need to do now is wait for that property to keep going up in value. Now, if we've done our research, that should happen within about 2 to 3 years if we do our research well. If we do our research really well, and I've certainly achieved these results before, you can get well in excess of 100 grand in a year if you really know what you're doing. Now, those opportunities come along every probably 3 to 5 years where there are markets moving that fast. There's certainly not every year that you can get 100 grand off a single property. But all you have to do is wait for the property to go up in value. Now it's up at 500 in this example. 90% is no longer 360, 90% is now 450, and the loan hasn't changed, it's interest only, but now we've got that space in between that we call available equity, as we talked about before. We then raise the equity loan, we go back to the first bank and say, hey, can we please have an equity loan? And now we've got up to 90 grand, and we can use that to pay the deposit and costs on our next property, and then we'll get a 90% loan, and we'll build our portfolio like that. The key thing to understand about growing a property portfolio is that it's exponential in growth. So the first property might take about 3 years to give birth to the next one, but then as time goes by, it'll continue to go up in value, but now the second property will give birth as well. So we've got, now 1 becomes 2, 2 become 4, 4 become 8, 8 becomes 16, etc., etc. And one of my mentors, he taught me, he was at age 30, he had 5 properties, but he lost them all in a divorce and he started from scratch. By age 57, he had 76 properties. Now, and that's how he did it. He built it that way. But one of the things he said to me, he said, Daimien, you must understand that 2/3 of those properties were put on in the last 1/3 of the time. So if it's taken him 30 years to get that number of properties, what he's saying is that, 50 of those properties were put on in the last 10 years of that 30 years. Because it's exponential growth. It starts small and gets bigger. But the more properties you got, the more chance you got of finding some equity somewhere. So the time interval between buying properties gets shorter as your portfolio grows. Okay, how to get started. First of all, you've got to save that deposit or borrow the money from family. Now, one of the things you might do, just going back a slide, one of the things you might do is when you get that first equity growth, you might use that to pay back the family member who lent you the money, and so that instead of buying your next investment property, and then wait for it to continue to go up, and then get your next investment property. Use existing equity. Use your super. Now, if you're going to use your superannuation, you do need to get specific advice from a licensed financial planner. But there is an opportunity now with self-managed super, and I'll just talk about it in broad terms. Self-managed super funds can be set up. You can have up to 4 beneficiaries of a self-managed super fund, which is quite interesting. So a husband and wife couple could put their super funds together, and then you can buy property within that super. Now, the restrictions are that the property, you can't borrow any more than 80% inside super, so you do need a 20% deposit. So if you're buying a $400,000 investment property minimum price, that means, 80 grand to be stumped up plus about 20 grand costs. Plus you'd want to have a little bit of cash left over. So if you've got over 100 grand in your super, between you and your partner or you on your own, then you should definitely have a chat to us, because we can point you in the right direction about turning that into an investment property. Now, if you know much about investing, you would have heard of the 7-10 rule. Now, the 7-10 rule says that if I put 100 grand into something and I get 7% for 10 years, it'll double. So if I put any amount of money into something and get 7% every year for 10 years, that amount will double. It's actually 196 if you use 100 grand. So if your money's just into straight shares and there's no borrowed money to help you grow the portfolio in your super fund, then that's what you can expect. In about 10 years, it should double in value plus your contributions in between. But if you buy an investment property with that money, let's say you bought a $400,000 investment property and you put 80 grand down as the 20% deposit and then 20 grand as for the cost, well, then you would own at the start of that 10-year process, you would own a property worth 400 grand with a $320,000 mortgage. Now, Historically, in the 1970s, house prices increased from 3 to 4 times from 1970 to 1980 in the eastern seaboard capital cities. In the 80s, they tripled. In the 90s, they less than doubled from 1990 to 2000, and of course we had the big recession back then. But they were pretty close, about 80 or 90% increase. And then last decade, they more than doubled in most capital cities. And this decade, we are tracking pretty strongly towards a double again. So if you bought an investment property instead with your super, and then it doubled in value in a period of time, call it 10 years or whatever you think it will, then you're going to have an $800,000 property with a 320 mortgage at the end, and then you got 480 grand profit, as opposed to just having a cash investment of 100 grand in shares and then doubling it. So just something to think about, and we can talk more about that at another time. All right. Another option you may have is to pool your money with somebody else, and this can be a good idea when you're getting started, but you do need to be very careful about who you invest with and make sure it's somebody you trust. And you should also have, from day one, the exit plan identified. So you should have a price point that you agree you're going to sell, or one person's going to buy the other party out. Because going forward after that first property, that joint venture can go from what was once an advantage can then become a disadvantage. Okay, what's the process for buying a property? Well, first of all, if you come to get help from us, the first thing we'll do is take you through a coaching and planning session where we'll make a plan for you. And that's really important, that you sit down with somebody with more experience than you and actually look at your options, because often a trained eye will see opportunities that you've got no idea you've got, and if they'll point them out to you, and that can make a massive difference to your success. Okay, then you need to talk about the location selection and then the property selection in that order. Okay, the location comes first, and then you find the property you need. After that, you'll then do the paperwork on that property, and make sure that you always have a finance exit clause just in case you can't get the finance. Get legal advice. You need a good property lawyer. Now, one of the mistakes I see people make constantly is they go to, first of all, with the mortgage broker, they go to their mate's uncle's cousin who walks dogs for a bloke who washes cars for a friend of theirs who's a mortgage broker, and then they go with that person because there's some sort of connection. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a good mortgage broker. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're a good solicitor. And it's really important that when you're putting your team of people together to help you, make sure that they are property investors themselves and that they understand all the little tricks of the game. You know, being a solicitor is quite a broad profession, and there's lots of different specialities. You need to have one that specialises in property. Also, with finance, 9 out of 10 mortgage brokers are not good enough for you if you want to be a property investor. They deal primarily with homeowners who just want to buy their house. But if you want to build an empire, you need a really good mortgage broker who knows how to structure your finances correctly so you can keep growing it. Once you've got all that, you can then submit your finance and get your approval, and then send in, before they hand the property over, you line up your building inspector and your rental manager. Settlement occurs. Get your quantity surveyor in for your depreciation schedule, and then hold your property as long as you can and to let the rents and values rise. Repeat the process and continue to grow your portfolio. You must make sure you've got a team of experts, and you must make sure that you look after them. Now, most people, when you're born into a poor family type environment, you learn to try and save a dollar everywhere you can. And that can be a bit of a false economy when it comes to investing. When you're investing, you need a team of people to help you. You need someone that's helping you with research, someone who's helping you find the properties, someone who's coaching and mentoring you to make sure you don't make any mistakes. You need a good mortgage broker. You need a good solicitor. You need good building inspectors wherever you're going to invest, a good rental manager wherever you're going to invest, quantity surveyor who's going to do your depreciation schedules for you. All of those people are quite important. But if you want them to help you and to get the best result for you, you need to be nice to them, okay? You need to look after them. When you're poor and you're paying someone to do a job for you, your mindset often is, you know what, I'm paying you money, you do what you're damn well told. And that's fine, but guess what? They're not going to work hard for you. And I'll give you an example. I had one client who wanted to, I introduced him to an excellent rental manager, and he wanted to screw the rental manager down from their percentage of 7.5% of the rent fee to 6.5%. I said, well, why would you want to do that? And he said, well, no one pays full price, Daimien. I said, okay, that's interesting. So we worked out what the saving would be. The saving was going to be $200 a year off the rental management. Now, that may sound like worthwhile, and some people might be saying, oh, well, they all add up. But actually, what he'd done in the process of doing that is made himself the most unpopular landlord in that rental management agency. So picture this. Let's say you're a rental manager now, and you know, a rental manager, you're charging 7.5%. But of that 7.5%, probably the first 5% goes to paying all of your bills, and then there's only 2.5% left over for you to make any money. And then this bloke comes in and says, I want to take 1% off you. So he wants to take 2/5 of your profit off you. And that's quite a lot of money to you. And he thinks he's just making $1. Now, on the other hand, then let's say you've got 4 properties vacant at the moment. One of those properties belongs to him. But yet one of the other properties belongs to me. And every year at Christmas time, I send you some flowers or a bottle of, if you're a bloke, I'll send you a bottle of spirits and a card in the mail. And I say, hey, thank you very much for looking after my property. I sleep very well at night knowing that it's in such capable hands. You are awesome. I hope you and your family have a wonderful Christmas, and I look forward to seeing you in the new year. And throughout the year, whenever you're talking to me on the phone or you're sending me SMS messages asking me for permission to do different things and decisions, I'm replying, hey, you're awesome. You're a rock star. Thanks very much. And I pay you full price. Now, my property's vacant, his property's vacant. In walks a great tenant into the rental manager's office, and they say, hi, I'm a highly paid such and such. I've just moved to town and I need somewhere to live. And who's getting that tenant? Not that guy. I'm getting that tenant because I look after my rental managers, and my rental managers in turn look after me. Now think about this. Every week that property's vacant was going to cost him $450 in lost rent revenue. Every week. And he wanted to just screw that manager down to get $200. So there's the lesson learned. It's a false economy, right? You need to make sure that you look after the people who are looking after you. If when that hot opportunity comes along, it might be that great hot spot to invest. It might be that great discount interest rate that's only available for limited time, or it might be all those different things. It might be the solicitor who's running late to get home, but stays home that extra hour to make sure they do your job properly, so you don't get stung. You want those people going the extra mile for you. You don't want them cutting corners. Mortgage broker. Mortgage brokers are great when you're investing. You don't want to go to the same bank. Do not stay with the same bank. As a general rule, one property per bank, and that's it. Why? Well, if you stay with the same bank, yes, they will look after you, but when you get to about 4 properties, they're going to stop lending you money. And the reason they're going to stop lending you money is because they're going to be too exposed to you. They're not going to be able to insure against you and all those things. We haven't got time to go into detail today, but follow that rule. You want to have 1 property per bank. Now, to do that, you need a really good mortgage broker who knows what all those different lenders are. And 95% of mortgage brokers, and I'm not exaggerating, I mean that hard and fast, 95% don't know how to look after investors because they probably don't have investment properties themselves and they don't understand how to structure things correctly. Rochelle, who works with all of our clients, she won't employ a mortgage broker unless they've got 7 years experience themselves in the first place, and that's the most junior broker in her office. So choose very carefully when it comes to your mortgage broker. And if you need a good mortgage broker, get in touch with us and we'll be happy to connect you. Solicitor. Your solicitor works independently and must work for you and not be giving any kickbacks to anyone else. We have a couple of great solicitors that we recommend our clients to where there is no commercial relationship between us, but we just know they're very, very good and we know that they'll look after our clients. And you need them to oversee your paperwork. I do think that every investor should definitely read at least 1 contract in their life. Don't just blindly hope that your solicitor is going to cover it off. It's part of your learning journey to make sure you understand how that all works. Quantity surveyor creates your depreciation schedule, critical to getting your tax benefits. Building inspector, as I spoke about earlier, you want a good building inspector who's going to go twice to do the initial inspection and then a re-inspection to ensure everything's squared away. Rental manager. Now, as I said, look after your rental manager and they'll get you good tenants. Don't look after them, you'll get the bottom of the bucket. Okay? You need a good rental manager to oversee all those things. Maintenance, repairs, regular inspections, report back to you. Good rental managers will provide you photos of any problems so you can see for yourself. They'll also handle disputes, chase overdue rent, all those sorts of things. Do not manage a property yourself. Don't manage a property yourself. You might think, oh, okay, I can handle it, whatever. When that person might be a friend or something like that, when that person, okay, falls on hard times, they are then going to start hitting you up and they're going to expect that your friendship is going to cut them some slack. Now, you can't afford to do that. You need to preserve your own cash and you can't get people in a situation where they can exploit you. Get a rental manager. Don't talk to your tenants directly. That's your rental manager's job. They will be fair and impartial and they'll handle it in accordance with the law because that's what they have to do. If you allow yourself direct contact with your tenant, you're leaving yourself open to being manipulated, get the guilt trip put on you, and then the rent will be slow and before you know it, you won't have any money. And I've coached thousands of clients and I've seen it happen many a time. They put family members into their properties or they manage them themselves and then the rents never go up in accordance with the market. They cut them too much slack. They don't hold their feet to the fire on things because they're worried about their relationship with that friend or family member. Okay. Where to go from here if you want to get more help. Okay. I used to be in the army. I think I said that earlier. I was in for 14 years. And when I was in the army, I was actually looking for someone to help me. And I made a lot of mistakes actually when I started in my property investing, mistakes that I could have easily avoided with the right help. So when I set up Integrity, the company, I set it up in a manner that was designed to help the person that I was when I was working full-time, time poor and trying to get started. So, and one of my favourite quotes at the top there, fools learn from their own experience. I prefer to profit from the experience of others, and that's what you get with us. So if you are looking for some help, we can do a whole heap of things to help you. You get me as your coach and strategist. I'll sit down with you and work out a plan and point you in the right direction, and you'll have a written plan on paper you can use. We've got the two Nicks, Nick and Nicholas, who help our clients in terms of finding areas to invest and properties in those areas. We've got Ben, our research manager. Ben's job is to find those next hot spots under my direction, and he's assisted by Charmy, our research analyst. We go to a lot of effort to find those areas, and we have some in-house research processes where we pick up on where the jobs are being created, where there's land supply issues, all those sorts of things. We have Amanda, who's our client care manager. Her job is to look after clients who are in the process of acquiring properties and their ongoing relationship with them. And then we have Rochelle, who's our mortgage broker. And then, of course, we have all of those supporting things you need. If you want to have a crack at self-managed super, or want to talk to someone about that, we have a great financial planner who is property friendly. Be very, very wary of dealing with financial planners and financial advisors because most of them won't talk to you about property. They're only licensed to talk to you about shares, super, managed funds, those sort, and personal insurances. So they're not going to talk to you about property, and in the process, they're going to eliminate one of the number one, I believe, and many people support this view with their research. The number one wealth creation strategy in this country is plain old residential real estate. Okay. This is the process we take our clients through. It's a one-stop shop. You get a one-on-one coaching session. Now, those sessions can be done via Skype, or if we travel all around the country. So if you can synchronise with whenever we're in that part of the world, or if you're in Brisbane, our head office is in Brisbane. But we do a one-on-one coaching. That takes about 2 hours. We talk about your personal situation, how you've got to where you are now, what your goals are, what you want to achieve, and then we'll sit down and talk you through all the different options that you may have, and then you decide what you want done with our support, and we help you to make a plan that you're 100% comfortable with and makes sense to you. and then we'll go on about doing that. Now, if I'm in any doubt about your financial ability to invest, I'll introduce you to Rochelle early in the process and get her to do a pre-approval type process. And then once you're ready to get an investment property, you'll get a location research briefing from us. So to help you, and that's the product of all of our research, to help you determine what location you want to invest in. Then we'll help you get a property there and take you through the acquisition process, finance, sourcing your finance, legal advice, building inspections, etc., 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 and then review and repeat. If you don't want to go to that level next, obviously that's of enormous value. If you don't want to go to that value, that level next, that's okay. Completely understand. It's only a webinar and you only just got to know us, some of you. But what we do, you can look at the free training, and I'll talk about that in a second. We do one-day courses all around Australia. So hang in there and just wait till I get to that slide and you can check that out. But the one-on-one appointment, that's what we do. Review your situation, confirm your goals, review your options, make a plan to achieve those goals, and provide you full support in achieving that plan. Now, normally if you make an appointment with us any other time, it costs you $4.97. If you make the appointment on the back of a webinar or a training day, it costs you $2.97, and then you're fully supported by the team for life. Now, obviously, all the different services that are provided by a solicitor and everybody else, they will charge you money for that. Our service, that's the only fee you pay, and we'll share with you our research and we'll source properties for you. We, much like a mortgage broker gets paid by the bank for introducing you to them, we do get a small referral fee from the people that we introduce you to when we source a property. I've got two ways I can run a business like this. One is I can charge you $10,000 for the service. The other way is I can charge them money for introducing you to them. So it's the same model. It's much better that way. Some people might say, well, that's a conflict of interest, and I say that's okay. But if I put you into a property and it goes up in value 50 grand in a short space of time, then what are you going to think of me? And then what are you going to do after that? You know, you're going to recommend us to your friends. You're going to continue to be an investor and buy more properties and things like that and keep us. So we really bend over backwards to help our clients and make sure we're putting them in the right place. We have no loyalty to anyone but you. And that's my parting advice for you. Surround yourself with the right people, take control and take action, and you'll get some good results. All right, complimentary one-day training days. Now, we do one-day training courses around Australia, and we do those from 9 a.m. till 4 p.m. Every capital city except for Hobart and some regional centres. And this is what we talk about: how to think like a property investor, they should say, historical market performance so you can understand the history of property prices and future expectations. Talk about finance products, structures, how they all work in detail. Then we talk about how to build a portfolio quickly, but also, very importantly, safely. We talk about location selection, property selection, and it's some really simple things you can do to manage all your risks along the way. This is the locations that we're doing it. Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth, Darwin, and then we've got Townsville, Toowoomba, Dalby, Mount Isa, Newcastle, Singleton, Canberra, Wagga Wagga, and Albury, Wodonga. Now, that brings us to the end of the webinar. If you want to jump straight to an appointment, just put in the now GoToWebinar will record everything you type in. So if you want to have an appointment, put appointment please plus your mobile number so we can call you, because I think all we'll have is your name and an email at the moment. But just put that in there. If you want to be registered for the training the next time we come to your location, please put training please, the city and your mobile number so we can call you and get all those details in. And then if you have any general questions, just put them in the box as well. All right, now I'm just going to maximise my little question window here and see if I can get some questions there. Okay, great. Okay, is defence housing a good option and why? All right, defence housing. Being ex-Defence Force, you would think that I'd be a big fan of defence housing. Unfortunately, I'm not. It has pros and cons. Now, a lot of the positives that they'll be very quick to tell you is that you're guaranteed to have a tenant. Usually they'll lease it for 6 or 9 years, and you're guaranteed to have a tenant for throughout that time. What they won't tell you is that their management fee, at last time I checked, was 16%. Rental fee, when market rate, is about 7.5%. And so the disadvantage there is obviously it chews into your cash flow a fair bit. What you do get, though, in response to that, though, is you get that guaranteed rent. So, and they will, I believe, repaint and recarpet the property at the end of that lease. So, but the key thing when you're property investing is that you need to keep an eye on your cash flow. And if you're paying 16% management fee, that's not helping you with your cash flow. So what might be better is, instead of giving that extra 8.5% to them, maybe put that into your cash buffer, and then when you need to redo the carpets and all that later, you can do it yourself. One of the other setbacks at DHA is that they're often criticised for not keeping pace with the rental increases to the market. And if you ever do need to sell one, not that you should sell ever, but if you ever do need to sell one, it's very, very hard to sell because the leases have to be sold with the property, and as a result, it's very hard to find someone who wants to buy property. Now, if you ever sell, you want to sell to an owner-occupier, which is 75% of all buyers, who's going to fall emotionally in love with the property and pay an inflated price. If it's got a DHA lease on it, you won't be able to sell it to anyone but an investor, and most investors will turn their nose up at it because of the management fee. But look, judge for yourself. Get on the DHA website and listen to their pitch and make your own decision. All right. How much? I think I've answered that one. Options using super, I've answered that. Okay, a few people are having a problem with the sound. I hope that's been fixed up. But okay, those specialists refer clients who will charge a client service fee. Okay, so if you're going to try and do all this on your own, you will get charged fees by all of those specialists. So the specialists that we refer to will charge you the same fees, but the difference will be that you know that we have done some due diligence on them and that they have proven themselves to us already through the process of looking after other clients. So by taking our recommendations, that takes a lot of the risk out of it. And you also will find that a lot of all those specialists are used to working with each other. For example, the broker and the solicitor and the financial planner are all used to talking to each other to help our clients out. So that's quite an advantage. Any chance to get a copy of the slides? I have an appointment with Stephen. Peter Doe, yes, we can help you out with that, I think. Let me just refer that matter to Stephen. Okay. All right, Ruben, I note your message, mate. We'll get back to you on that. Okay. Lee, thank you, mate. We'll get in touch. Alicia in Melbourne, yes, we'll be in touch. Mark, g'day, mate. I'll have a chat to you about that too. Praven, okay, thank you, mate. We'll be in touch. Okay, I got a question here from Tony. If I buy a property, if I pay 10% deposit, borrow 90%, and then after the first month I put 100 grand into the offset account, will that boost my profit margin within a short period? Tony, if you put 100 grand into your offset account, that will immediately dramatically reduce the amount of interest you pay, which will, of course, improve your cash flow. No doubt about that. My view on cash is you should try and preserve it as much as possible. Cash is king, so that's probably a better structure. You might just want to look at the pros and cons, depending on what else you need to do. If you want a more detailed answer than that, I recommend you make an appointment, mate. Because I'm hesitant to give you any more detail than that without knowing your full situation. How soon can you take out an equity loan? Okay, well, you actually need if you want to pull out 50 grand, you probably need the property to go up about 60 because you need to still have that 10% of equity as well. So based on how much you need to pull out, you probably need about 70 grand capital growth before a property is going to give birth to another one. Okay. Question from Rory. When you redraw the equity on a property, say to 90%, do I have to pay LMI again on the mortgage that you are drawing equity against? Short answer, yes. Okay. Would you advise someone buy their first home and live in it or invest in the first rental property? So question from Rob. Should you buy your first home and live in it or invest in your first rental property? It's a good question, Rob, and I think that each individual has to make their own decision there. Now, what are the advantages? If you buy your first home, you'll get first homeowners grant, and then if you're in the Defence Force also has a whole heap of incentives. I know there's a few defence people watching tonight. In terms of that, there are requirements to live in that property for the first 12 months, if that is the case. But if it's just the first homeowners grant, it's only $7,000, first point. Now, if you live in an area where it's not a very good market at the moment, and buy a rental property somewhere else that is, well then chances are you're going to make your $7,000 pretty quick from your $400,000, $500,000 investment property. So I think a lot of people get lured into buying locally, buy the first homeowners grant, because when you're poor, $7,000 is a lot of money. But in the grand scheme of things, it may not be. The other thing is, whilst it wasn't the case when the first homeowners grant first came out, it now is the case. And you have to constantly check the policy, of course. But at the moment, I believe that if you buy an investment property first, you're still entitled to the first homeowners grant later. So each state has different rules. So you need to just get on the first homeowners grant website and then go to your respective state's website and just confirm that before you do that. But you might find that you're better off, if you live in an area that's not a very good investment, you're better off buying an investment property somewhere else first and then come back and use your first homeowners grant when where you live becomes a better investment. Okay, Regina, look forward to having a chat to you. Bill, do you pay for a quantity surveyor to calculate depreciation costs each year? Bill, it's a funny question actually. No, you don't. A good quantity surveyor, especially when you buy a new property, a good quantity surveyor will do the schedule for the entire period of time from the brand new cost. If you do any renovations or change the property in any fundamental way, it may pay to bring the quantity surveyor back. But usually you just call them first and they'll tell you over the phone whether it's worth doing or not. Most quantity surveyors guarantee their fee, that you'll get their fee back in your first tax return. But you shouldn't have to pay them each year. There are some quantity surveyors out there, I've heard this recently, that are trying that on, that are giving you instead of giving you the whole report up front, they're emailing you each year's report in an attempt to try and squeeze money out of your long term. I think anyone who suggests that, Bill, I think you should go and get a different quantity surveyor, and we can certainly recommend a really good one. Just get in touch with the office here and on our 1300 number, 1300 372 677, or you can just put a message on here in the question box. Just put a quantity surveyor, please, and your phone number, and we'll get in touch and make that referral for you, Bill. All right. What have I got here? Okay, got a question from Sergi. How do we work with clients in Sydney and other cities? Okay, as we go around the country doing the training, we do have the facility either side of when we're in town to have a chat to people who would prefer to do it live. What I say to those people is embrace technology and use Skype. It's really, really good, and we have the software that we use to build the plan live so you can see our screen. However, if you insist on face-to-face, we can do that. And then all of the experts, they will deal with you by phone, via, whatever means you're comfortable with, email, Skype, etc. How much hand-holding do we do? From Regina. So, Regina, we can do as much or as little hand-holding as we need, and you need to tell us what that is when we have our appointment. We basically can do pretty much everything except make all the decisions for you. So we do everything. We do research. We source properties. We have a broker, sources of finance, etc. But what we won't do is take the responsibility of the decisions away from you, which I think is quite important that you do that. But we will hold your hand every step of the way, and we will not ask you to do anything to take the next step until you're 100% comfortable with it. And it's not a quick process. You know, you have to have a chat. There's a whole heap of conversations that have to be had. But you know, if you want to make money from property, you've got to get in. You've got to do all the work. And if you don't want to do all the work, then you won't make any money from property. That's the bottom line, really. But yes, Regina, we'll support you every step of the way. No problem at all. Okay, Lucy, we'll see you in Adelaide. Okay, Pamela, looking forward to seeing you again. Ruben, got your details, mate. Okay, Kaylin has asked a question. Is it acceptable to buy from one real estate agent and then get it rented through another estate agent? Yes, most certainly. A lot of real estate, if you buy an investment property, well, first let's start with the real problem there. If you're buying a property through a real estate agent, you're probably doing it wrong. Because real estate agents are generally selling second-hand properties, and they're driven by the agenda that they already have the listing for that property. And so if you go to a real estate agent and say, I want to buy this property, I want an investment property, what do you think they're going to tell you? They're going to tell you that where their agency is the best bloody place in the world to invest, and that the properties that they've got listed are the best properties to buy. So, and obviously that doesn't make any sense. There's no integrity in that process. A property investor should first be concerned about the location, and then they should be going and buying, you know, good solid properties in that location. And those properties are better off sourced through a property investment company that is getting new property that has all the boxes ticked for you. You don't want to take a chance on some real estate agency. Okay. Now, to answer your question specifically, there is no obligation for you to use the same agency you bought the property through to then rent it. They will want you to do that because that's more income for them. But if you have a better real estate agent to rent it through, then you just go and appoint them, and it's no problem at all. Okay. Okay, question there. My son's in the army. Who can he seek advice for? Well, obviously, you know, I have a defence background, and there's actually quite a few people in the company who are ex-defence, who were property investing when in defence, and then come across to work with us. Erno, I hope I'm saying that right, your name, I-R-I-N-A. I apologise if not. Put your son in touch with us, and we will be able to help him with all of those things. Okay, there's a question here from Rory. There's someone else out there suggesting that once you have a sizable portfolio at about 50% LVR, you can redraw the equity annually and use that as your income, which saves on tax, only bank interest rather than tax. This relies on capital growth being greater than your redraw. Do you have thoughts of this as possible and sustainable? Okay, short answer, Rory, is yes. I think that is possible. It's quite a complex question, and perhaps out of the scope of this webinar tonight, which is aimed at beginners. But yeah, it makes sense. But I would wonder why you would wait for your portfolio to go down that much and not live off the surplus rents. But you certainly can do that. And when you get into the the consolidation and retirement phases, then if your rent returns are quite good, then you can redraw equity to do all sorts of things. Pay yourself an income is fine, but also buy your cars, holidays, all those sorts of things. The key thing is just to make sure that that big business that is your portfolio has money coming in, money going out, always has more money coming in than it's got going out. As long as you maintain that rule, you should be able to live comfortably. And of course, I'd want to be sure that all those properties are in pretty stable markets, because I've seen many people who have been in the more like the mining towns and things like that, living the high life when the rents are really high, and then getting stung pretty hard when the rent's eased off. So you've got to limit your exposure to those markets if you're going to do something like that. A question from Rob. To make an appointment with us and begin the process, should you have a good deposit saved? Rob, I think you need to have a start or have confidence that you're on your way. But we do have a lot of clients who we mentor through their savings phase as well. So, and we just support them, check in with them every 3 to 6 months, help them to stay motivated and accountable, and then when they finally do get their deposit together, then we start the full process of acquiring a property. Okay, question from Scott. Okay, so Scott, hi, how do you go about sourcing properties for your clients so as to prevent increased competition between your clients for those properties? Thanks, Scott. Okay, that's a good question, Scott. It's sort of, I guess what you're driving at there is, are we creating a self-fulfilling prophecy by putting lots of clients into the one spot? We're very picky actually about where we put our clients, and we always have several locations that we like, not just one. So I think you'll find that we're certainly not putting people into an area, that many people in the same spot. That is one of my concerns actually, and I do pride myself on integrity. That's why the company's named that way. And I know all the horror stories about what other things like that have been done before, and I won't have any part of that. So also too, one of our rules, we won't put anyone in a market in an area where there's not a cap on the number of property investors. All the good pocket developments these days have a cap, usually about 25% investors and 75% owner-occupiers, so that protects from that as well. There's been a few historical examples where really big property investment companies, I would describe ourselves as a medium-sized company, but really big companies have, put investors into an entire estate 100% and created a rental slum. I couldn't do that. I wouldn't sleep at night. It's really we like to be small, have a limited number of clients so that we're not overextending ourselves and we can look after each other. All right. Okay, Lee's asked, do I know of any free Excel spreadsheets to manage property costs and expenses with projections, etc.? Lee, here's my view on those sorts of things. There is some software out there that costs money, and you're not asking me for that. You've probably heard of PIA. That does cost money. But I really think that what you need to do is educate yourself so well that you can work all that out. You can create your own spreadsheet. And when you know all the costs in and all the costs out, and you can put them on the spreadsheet, and you can teach yourself Excel off the internet and all those formulas, because then at least you can put your hand on your heart and know that you're getting it right. There are some products out there, but the disadvantage of those products is you don't really know what the algorithms are behind them and whether they're up to date and accurate. And as far as property investment goes, if you want it done for you, I think PIA is probably the market leader in Australia for that sort of solution. Okay. Thank you, Paul and Kelly. I look forward to seeing you on Thursday too. Okay, membership price. Question there. Well, yeah, it's $297 to have your first appointment, and then after that, as long as you're an active client and acting in good faith, then we're quite happy to support you throughout the process. Okay, just one last question there. Question on first home buyers. Okay. So Ruben's put there, I was looking for some information about first home buyers. Said, couldn't find anything about what you mentioned. In one of the meetings with a finance guy, they asked me if I had another property because if I did, I couldn't apply for it. Okay, Ruben, I think you're being bum drummed there, mate. When the first homeowners grant came out, you could not get it for if you already owned another property. And a lot of people haven't updated their knowledge since then. So I think you'll find that the person who gave you that advice that said if you already had another property you can't apply for first homeowners grant, I think you'll find that they are misinformed. Now, check the South Australian state website and see if the first homeowners grant, now not to be confused with any state grants, the federally funded state administered FHOG, that is the one you want to check out. All right, what else we got there? Now Sarah, our accountant's online today, and she has said there that she is happy to help people who want to have a calculation spreadsheet. So Lee, if you get in touch with us, just put in the question box there, accountant please, and put your phone number on there, and then I'll get Sarah to connect with you, Lee, and she can have a chat to you about your situation and helping you do that. She provides that service to her clients, so maybe you've got some other things you need her to do for you as well in return. Can appointments be scheduled in various offices in various cities? Yes, Rob, we can do that if you're not comfortable with that. Okay, Jeff, good to see you online, mate. Looking forward to seeing you again soon. And okay, that's all the questions I'm tracking. If you've put I'll keep answering those. Thank you, Lee. You put a question in now, away we go. If you put a question in and I haven't answered it, I've probably scrolled past it. Please throw it in again, or if you've got any last minute questions, I'll stay here until all the questions are answered. Mark Loxton, got you, buddy. No worries. We'll do that too for you. You help client by better investment in a better place. Do you help clients buy better investment properties in a better place? Yes, we do. If you'd like some assistance, then please put that in there, and we'll be in touch. Okay, I'm not getting any more questions. I've still got 36 people online from our original 100. Okay. Well, here we go. Thoughts on NRAS. Okay, great. Well, the NRAS scheme is wrapping up, so it's probably not relevant anymore, Rory, about NRAS. But what I know about NRAS was that some people have mixed results with NRAS. NRAS is a scheme with the government where you had to reduce your rent and make it accessible to people who needed reduced rent. But in return, the government will then pay you a subsidy, will put you in a superior position to where you were before. Sounded great in theory. The problem was that there was a whole application process that had to be gone through to do NRAS, and the only people who were willing to put the work in most of the cases were developers who had apartments and townhouses, and they knew that those apartments and townhouses had bad cash flow. So then when NRAS come along, they went, oh, this is a great solution. Let's make all of these NRAS. And then they got NRAS pre-approved and sold them with the NRAS in place. Only problem was, in a lot of the cases, and there are some exceptions which were quite good, but most of the cases, it was what they did then create what they now call an NRAS slum, where because all of the rental accommodation was discounted, then they got in the lower part of the barrel into those areas, and then those townhouse complexes and unit complexes then became very shabby because you had lots of renters who were from the lower end of town and were not taking care of it. So I think if you were going to do NRAS, or if they introduced a similar scheme again, you'd want to make sure that they had a low percentage in the complex that was NRAS approved, and they were still pursuing a majority owner-occupier equation. All right, getting a few more questions coming now. Rabil, that's fine. Now, you will get the recording of this webinar emailed to you, so if you'd like to catch up on what you missed, just wait till you get that email, watch the recording, and then decide what you want to do from there. You can send us an email. Okay. Okay, what other ways of buying a property instead of using a real estate agent? Question from Lucy. Lucy, obviously there are buyer's agents out there who will act on your behalf, and also we source properties for our clients. If you want to buy an investment property, of course I may be biased, but really I don't know of another company that does a better service than we do, and I say that with my hand on my heart. I believe our process has integrity because it's research-led first and foremost. So we're going to areas based on what the research says, not based on, who I'm mates with and all that sort of stuff that some of these other people carry on with. We find an area we like, we then go into that area, we then approach all of the builders we can find in that area and do due diligence on them all, and then we make an arrangement with them to introduce clients to them, and then we introduce our clients to those people once they've passed all our due diligence checks. So if you'd like some help buying investment property, Lucy, just say so, and maybe come to our training next time we're in your location, or you can go straight to an appointment and we can have a chat about that. Okay. Okay, a question there from Kaylin. Is it better to invest in units or houses, or a variety of each? Okay, units versus houses. I did talk about them earlier, and perhaps you joined us late, or I was talking too fast, so I apologise if it was my fault. The problem with units is generally the body corporate fee is what wipes them out. Now, units also too, if you're buying in high-rise complexes and things like that, they can be a bit of a double-edged sword. Now, if I'm a property developer and I'm building a high-rise tower with 300 units in it, then the bank won't actually give me all their money up front. I have to sell those off the plan. I usually have to, at the moment, I think it's about 75% of them I have to sell off the plan. And then the way I do that is I get people, I get a graphic designer and an architect, and I put together some glossy brochures, and then I run some seminars around the country, and I get them sold off the plan. Now, those people will then sign unconditional contracts, which mean they have to buy them, and they'll put their 10% deposit down, and then that money will be held in trust till it's finished. Now, the problem is when it's finished, 300 apartments come onto the market at the same time, and sadly, while there might be some capital growth during the build, sadly what will happen is usually that then floods the market with rentals, and rents start come plummeting down as all the new landlords try and secure tenants. Also, and then you get slugged with your first body corporate fee, which can be quite large. You know, a townhouse is about as good as it gets for body corporate, usually about $2,400 a year. Some apartments might, if they don't have elevators and things like that, they might be low at about $5,000. The big high rises can be easily 5 figures, you know, 10 grand plus, and some of the real, you know, high spec addresses can be 25 grand a year, which is just crazy. You know, you're talking about $500 a week just for the body corporate fees. But you would expect they would get a pretty high rent as well if they're that high spec. So my advice is stay away from units. A lot of people fall in the trap of buying units because they believe in this. If you buy within 5 kilometres or 10 kilometres of the city, you're going to get a better capital growth. Now that may have some truth to it, but the problem is that's all you'll be buying, because that property will be so hard negative cash flow you won't be able to afford anything else. And just remember, the person with 10 properties who pays for himself in less blue chip areas is still going to make more money than the person who's only got 1 or 2 properties in the blue chip area. All right. G'day, Paul and Barbs. Good to see you online. The answer is yes. You can do that. You just need to do the math. If you take your money out of your offset account and use it as your deposit for your next property, you probably want to have a chat to a broker about that, Paul, and make sure that the different ways to do that. One option might be to pay down the loan and then refinance out, so that you have and then pay down your existing loan and then get an equity loan, which is then tax deductible, to pay the deposit rather than just paying cash. Get in touch with us, mate, and if you want to have another Skype session to just do a review of your current situation and update it, I would love to do that, and I'll do that for you as an existing client free of charge. So just as long as if you're still there, Paul, just let me know, and we can make that happen. Okay, wholesaling of property. Okay, so Lucy, I mean, what you're talking about there is probably not within the scope of today's session. If you want to go and buy property in bulk from a wholesaler, or you know, cut out a few of the middlemen and try and do it all yourself, the one bit of advice I'd give you there, if you are going to do that, make sure you know what you're doing, because a lot of people try and be clever and try and do it all on their own, and then they pay for their education the hard way by making mistakes. All right. Are there any other questions? All right. If you'd like an appointment, make sure you put appointment please in. If you'd like to go to training, you can either register yourself by using that link down the bottom there, or you can put training please in the question board and we will register you for you. You just need to put in your You just need to put in your phone number so we can ring you and confirm that. And if there's no more, I'm going to sign off there. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance tonight. If you're watching the recording of this online and you want to get in touch with us, then all you need to do is email us at info@integrityproperty.com.au, or if you go to that link for the free training, you can get up to date on there, or you can call our 1300 number, 1300 372 677, and we'll organise a little pop-up to go on the video here so you can see that too. Okay, that's all for me. Thank you very much, and happy investing. Cheers.